Well, good morning again to everyone on this Divine Mercy Sunday. You know, this weekend, I'm supposed to talk about the Appeal 2025. And in case you don't know what that is, the Appeal is the annual campaign that raises money to support the Diocese of Columbus. So Catholics throughout Central Ohio, we donate so that the Diocese of Columbus can continue its mission, can continue its ministries. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of the Appeal. I can't emphasize enough the importance of our parish reaching our goal for the Appeal. But to be honest, I really don't want to talk about the Appeal this weekend. I would rather talk about the beautiful readings we just heard. I'd love to talk rather about it being Divine Mercy Sunday. We have this beautiful image of divine mercy in our sanctuary. The whole church is focusing on mercy and God's forgiveness. Plus, we are grieving the passing of Pope Francis. So I would much rather talk about his legacy. Therefore, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about all of these things, okay? In these 2 pages, a 2-page homily, I want you to come with me during this homily and focus on the overarching theme, which will be gestures. Why? Because Pope Francis has been described as the Pope of gestures. He continually expressed himself and our Catholic faith through significant gestures. In particular, Francis used gestures to communicate the closeness of God, the compassion and mercy of our God. And here's an example of what I mean. His very first Easter as Pope, way back in 2013, there was a picture of him. Maybe you saw it. It went viral. So this was only a few weeks after he was elected Pope. And there were 250,000 people in St. Peter's Square in Rome that Easter Sunday afternoon. And the Pope Mobile was driving through the square so that the Pope could greet the pilgrims with a smile and a wave. But then the Pope Mobile suddenly stopped in the middle of St. Peter's Square, and a child was lifted up to Pope Francis. It was an 8-year-old boy with severe physical disabilities, and Pope Francis embraced the child and held him for a good long while. And a million pictures were taken of that scene, and as I said, it went viral. And Pope Francis, in that simple yet powerful gesture, he communicated to the world Jesus' love, God's closeness and care for the lowly. Another example, and this perhaps is what resonated most with me during Pope Francis' entire pontificate. It was during the pandemic. And Francis conducted this extraordinary liturgy in an empty St. Peter's Square. Maybe you saw this online. I know that I've watched it multiple times over these past 5 years. It was raining that day. Rome was a picture of gloom. It was eerie, almost apocalyptic. But with the attention of millions who were viewing online, Pope Francis preached about that story in the Bible of Jesus calming the stormy sea. And he prayed, "Lord, you ask us not to be afraid, yet our faith is weak and we are fearful. But you, Lord, will not leave us at the mercy of the storm." Then he invoked God's blessing and Mary's intercession upon the whole world. Do you see? That liturgy was a gesture that pointed to the fact that God was close to us, even during global catastrophe, that God was in control in the midst of that uncertainty. One last example. This one is very recent. The war in Israel and Gaza, which started in October of 2023. Well, there is one Catholic church in the Gaza Strip, Holy Family Church. And throughout the conflict, there have been 300 people living in this church as refugees, if you can imagine that, what that would be like. And since the beginning of this war, Pope Francis has called this church, this Catholic church, Holy Family Church, he has called that church every single day. He called to let them know that he was with them in prayer and that God was close to them, that they weren't forgotten in their pain and grief. That daily phone call was a gesture of support to all people suffering the ravages of war. Do you remember the gospel that the deacon just read? Today's gospel shows that Jesus, too, is a man of gestures. As he says, "Peace be with you," to his disciples, he shows them his wounded hands and side. It's a gesture of compassion because he knows their confusion and their fear in that moment. He offers Thomas a gesture of mercy. This is Thomas who left those other apostles that first Easter afternoon and who doubted Christ's resurrection. Jesus shows Thomas his wounds as a gesture of reconciliation and encouragement and love. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. This is our Catholic faith. We see these provocative gestures of Christ and we know his mercy. Above all, we look to his death on the cross and his rising from the grave. He is saying, without even using words, that he loves us without limit. Jesus communicates to his church, even today, in every single Mass, with this incredible gesture of love. He gives us the Eucharist. It's his body and blood, his real presence. He cannot help but remain close to us. He comes into contact with us, his disciples, through the celebration of the Mass, the reception of Holy Communion. We touch his wounds in his hands and his side. By the way, you and I, fellow Christians, we're called to be people of gestures, not just when we're angry on the freeway. That's not what I mean. We're called to be people of gestures in unambiguous ways. We communicate God's mercy. That's how we can imitate Pope Francis. With or without words, we can communicate the compassionate heart of Christ. So, coming to an end and circling back to the appeal, this annual campaign is an expression of our faith, generosity to the church, Listen to me. Generosity to the church is a gesture of gratitude for all of the blessings that we have received from our God. Moreover, our gift acknowledges that we belong to something so much bigger. We're Catholic. That means we belong to a parish, and we belong to a diocese, and we belong to this universal church. So in these days when the news is talking about how they're going to elect the next pope in the conclave in Vatican City, guess what? That's our religion. Selecting a successor to St. Peter, that's been happening now in our church for 2,000 years. The papacy, the church itself, exists to communicate God's love and mercy to the world. And that's why we support the church. It's simply a gesture among so many on our part to magnify Jesus Christ, whose wounded hands are extended to the world.